Hello guys, DJ Parson here, and we're back for H2 of the Civil Cards review. You should know the rules by now. If not, check out the first videos, but I think I don't have to explain anything, and we can start right off. And we see again, we start with coal and selective breeding, and I value them higher than I did the ones from H1, because they just give more of a boost. Also, they are only one of each in 1 vs 1 player games, and in more player games resource production and food production is more important, so there they also valued higher. And I often think you can skip iron and irrigation quite easily, because you are fine with 3 production in the beginning, and then in H2 you can, if you have the space, you can swap to the coal or the selective breeding. Also selective breeding way better than irrigation. One problem is that in 1 vs 1 games there's only one selective breeding, but it just gives you so much more room. With irrigation you reach the point where you are stuck with your population, even though you invested in irrigation, and that doesn't happen with selective breeding really. So I'm going to give coal an 8 and selective breeding a 9, simply because food production is harder to get. There's less yellow cards, and it's great to have selective breeding. You have so much room with that. Now for the urban buildings, we start with organized religion. Organized religion again is very expensive with resources, not that expensive for technologies, and you definitely can pick it up if you have a big happy face problem. I usually don't get it because I think there are better ways, like wonders that produce happy faces and a lot of culture, like Eiffel Tower, and you can easily go to H3 with only wonders and maybe theocracy and noble religions. So I don't really want to invest in better religion. You can do, it's definitely fine, but I can't give it more than a 5 because I really don't ever use it. Now for scientific method. Scientific method is really nice, but it's in the weird spot that it's between the computers and the alchemy. So you never know if you don't have alchemy, then you really want to wait for computers, and if you do have alchemy, you really don't want scientific method because you already have alchemy. So you can pick it up. Sometimes it is quite nice. It also works to a certain degree with some of the leaders, like Bill Gates or Sid Meier, but you really want computers for those. So I think scientific method is in a weird spot really. So I would give it a 6, because it can definitely save you sometimes, and it's a nice pickup, but it often feels weird not to get computers instead. Then journalism. And journalism is really nice, but it's also very greedy and hard to justify to pick it up. I think in more player games it's easier to justify getting them. In 1 vs 1 it's really greedy because they're so expensive and you need quite a high resource production, which is not that often in 1 vs 1 games. If you get them, they are one of the best urban buildings, giving you 2 science and 2 culture. It's really awesome. So I will give it a 7, even though I don't really pick it off that much, but I feel there's definitely something to this building that maybe I have to go more on the edge and test it out and try to make it work, but often it just feels too greedy to get it. Yeah. So continuing with team sports. Team sports, of course, helps you with the happy faces, gets you some strength. Also is very cheap, especially if you have like architecture. Architecture, it only costs 3 resources. Also there's the arenas were buffed a little bit with the new leaders from H3 especially. Like Pierre de Coubertin, really great with team sports. Also the H3 arenas were buffed, so I think Team Swords also is in a weird spot between the different arenas, because the H3 arenas just is so much better. It gives so much strength now. The epi phases don't really matter that much most of the time if you have 4 or 5. But also the H3 arenas count for so much, like H3 technology for the impacts, urban buildings, it's higher, and so on. So I don't know, when there's the leaders that benefit from Team Swords in the game, like Coubertin, it can definitely pick it up. If you have like epi phase problem, get to arenas, maybe get architecture, get another one, produce quite a lot of culture with Pierre de Coubertin, and also your heavy phase problem is gone, you have strength, also very nice. So I think it's definitely can be a good pickup. I usually want to wait more for the H3 arena, but also there's only one in the game, in one versus one at least, so it can be too greedy to wait for that. So I will give it a 6. Now Opera, I feel the movies get a little bit too expensive, and yeah, it always feels like the one before were a little bit better. I always feel like, oh, I should have gotten the one from H1, because it's just so much cheaper. It only costs 4 resources and gives you almost the same. One more culture isn't that big a deal. So Opera also feels pretty greedy. If you're in a high science, high culture production game, of course they're very good, but also a little bit like the other urban buildings from H2. You always feel like if you really want to go for these urban buildings, you can wait for H3, or get them in H1 if you want them before H2. Urban buildings are quite strong, but you always feel like you're missing out on the H3 urban buildings. So we'll also give it a 6. So we get to the special blue technologies, starting with navigation. Blue technologies always nice if you have a lot of science, or even if you don't have that much resources, because they give you something without spending resources. Of course, you basically never want to get the same blue technology you have in H1 and also get it in H2. Even though they are a little bit stronger, if you have to pay both technologies, basically, they are not worth it. So navigation, like all colony cards, very dependent on what you draw and what position you are in. Overall, not too bad. The 2 strength can help definitely if you have lots of science. Also very nice for the impacts in the end, especially from H2. They are and quite a lot impacts where they are worth quite a bit. So I would give it a 6, because it doesn't feel particularly strong, but a good tech if you have the 6 science and want to do anything with it. Don't have the blue, yellow tokens, so you don't have workers, don't have resources, you just want to make use of your science. It's a great pickup. Strategy, one of the best cards in the game, especially in 1 versus 1. The 3 strength is quite a big deal, and then 2 military actions, also super strong. I feel like they should have nerfed it a little bit, like giving it only 2 strength. It still often feels like a 3 civil action pickup. I feel like if there's cards that you definitely are totally fine with picking for 3 civil actions almost every game, then they're a little bit too strong. So there's nothing else to give strategy but a 10. But of course they also have to be stronger cards than others. I don't think it's a big problem with strategy, but I think at 2 and 2 it would be also quite strong. Then we have justice system, and if you compare justice system to Court of Laws, it's in a lot of times it's really strong. The 3 blue tokens can be used for quite a lot. Often you think blue tokens are not worth that much, but it gives you freedom in what you do in your turn, because you don't have to look for corruption that often, especially with some of the new wonders, especially the Louvre, where you have to have quite a lot of blue tokens to spare. It's really strong. Also only 7 as a very cheap cost compared to Court of Laws, where it's 6 and doesn't give you the blue tokens. Of course, depends a little bit how many civil actions you have, how much science you have, and yeah, just overall what your game plan is. But in a lot of situations it's really strong, so I'm going to give it an 8. And then we have architecture. Architecture, all these all the 3 cards of this type, I don't even know what they are called officially, are nice pickup sometimes, but I feel like in 1v1 games they are often not worth their cost. 6 science is quite a lot. You can get other stuff for it, and also you have to have enough science to make any use of the architecture. You have to then also get opera or journalism to make use of it. That also costs science. So in a high science game, high economy game, it's definitely good. The usual 1v1 games are very high military games, so not a very good pickup there. In more play games it definitely becomes better. Also with the new wonders, where there are lots of steps you have to build, they definitely got a little bit stronger, but no, not more than a 6 for me. So we come to the military cards, or the military techs, that is. And here I'm going to start with the cannons, because cannons are the most important military technology in H2. Basically it's always a new technology that joins from that age. Like in H1 the most important was the knights, now it's the cannons. And if you don't get the cannons, especially again in 1v1s, there are 2 cannons, so you should get one. If for some reason you don't get it, you can be in really big trouble, because most of the very good H3 and also H2 tactics need the cannons, and there's only 1 rockets in H3, so if you get your opponent takes that away from you as well, and you don't have any artillery, you're really in big trouble. So the cannon definitely is a 10. Yeah, you don't have to pick it up for too much, because there's 2, but you definitely have to be careful when the first and the second one come, and then definitely take one. Cavalryman, also not too bad, especially because of the very good H3 tactic immobilized artillery, where 1 cavalry and 2 cannons give 10 strength, which is in my opinion the best tactic in the game. And cavalrymen feel a little bit bad if you have knights already, so often they are skippable if you have knights. You can't just, don't want to justify getting them. So I usually only take them if I skip knights for some reason. If I have quite a lot of swordsmen, or with Joan of Arc it was often possible to skip the knights. So I will give it an 8 because they're definitely strong. If you don't have knights, definitely get them. If you do have the knights, usually not. Only if you really want to go for that mobilized artillery or something else. Riflemen, if you don't have swordsmen, but you most of the time have swordsmen, if you don't, it becomes quite important sometimes, because you can deny your opponent also some high valuable tactics, especially if you have the tactics and he doesn't have swordsmen. You can just deny it to him, but I will give it only a 7. So now we have the government technologies. Republic was made a little bit stronger. now costs less, especially when, also when declaring it as a revolution. I think before it was 13 and 3. Yeah, definitely the right call. It wasn't that strong. Could be strong with, like, if you have Napoleon or strategy, and you don't need the extra military actions from constitutional monarchy. So I think they definitely did a good job making Republic just a little bit cheaper. I think H2 government forms aren't really that important, because I most of the time get one from H1, and then you don't want to get one from H2 as well. If you can get one from H3, but most of the time you don't want technologies from 2 ages in a row, especially 1 and 2. So I will give both of them a 7. If you don't have one from H1 on new government, you definitely can pick them up when they are still very, very good. But most of the time you want government forms from H1. So we come to the yellow cards, and Rich Land becomes quite bad, I think. It has a really downward curve, because the building of new mines or farms is very few opportunities this late in the game, and upgrading definitely can be used, but for that efficient upgrade is just better, because it can also be used with urban buildings. So I think Land becomes one of the worst new yellow cards in H2. If you have coal or selective breeding, you want to upgrade them, of course. It's just as strong as efficient upgrade, or even stronger than reserves, but it just doesn't have that much opportunity to be used. Engineering Genius, also not that strong anymore. I feel often I take it and then I don't have the opportunity to go for a wonder from H3, don't have one from H2, and I just have to discard it. Of course, still lots of resources for your wonders, so if you're building one, it's definitely strong, but you can't really guarantee that you will build one when you pick it up. So yeah, it will be an 8 for me, because it's still a lot of resources you can save. But like from H1, there's almost a guarantee that you will have a wonder to use it on. But in the later ages, you can't guarantee it, because if they come too late, then you can't afford them, or they aren't worth it anymore. Then revolutionary idea, really good. Science becomes or is always very important. 2 civil actions for 4 science. Definitely a good deal. Nothing more to say, it's definitely a 9. Could even be a 10, but yeah, I think 10 is reserved for another yellow card. Patriotism can be quite important if you are low on military actions. Also in H3, if you want to declare war on culture and you only have 3 or 4 military actions, then this extra military action is really important. But most cases you have enough military actions, so patriotism again, very dependent on how many military actions you have, so I will give it a 6. And frugality becomes a little bit more important in the later game. If you get this 1 extra population out, especially before the age ends, and you have too much consumption, can definitely be good, but also not one of the strongest. Maybe same as frugality, as patriotism, so I will give it a 6 as well, because it's only food you are getting. Breakthrough, definitely the strongest. 3 science for only 1 civil action, such a great deal. And yeah, you definitely will develop quite a lot of technologies, so you don't have any problems that they will just lie in your hand. Of course, revolutionary idea is a little bit more flexible. especially if you lose in a war and you can't get enough science to research anything, but I still feel breakthrough is stronger and it is a 10. Then efficient upgrade, the 3 resources for 1 civil action. In H2 you most likely will upgrade something like coal, selective breeding, or any of the urban buildings. 3 resources, it's good and it's cheap, only 1 selection you have to pay. I use it quite often and will always pick it up if I have an action to use it on. I will give a 9, could also be an 8, could also be a 9, really down to preference. Then Wave of Nationalism, also really dependent on the game state and of course the amount of players. 1 versus 1, it's really strong, getting 6 resources, especially if you are still only on 3 mines, 3 bronze mines. Having this in your hand often decreases any chance for the other player to declare wars, so quite important. 4-player games not as much, but still same spot as efficient upgrade I think, and also urban growth. They could all be an 8 or a 9, I will give them an 8, because science is of all more important, so I will give the 9 and 10 to breakthrough and the revolutionary idea. So yeah, I already said, urban growth, similar to efficient upgrade, you also want to build new urban buildings most likely, so it's an 8. And then reserves, really flexible, but also double the cost basically of urban growth and the others, efficient upgrade. So having the option to go for the food and being able to spend the resources on anything can be quite nice, especially if you need the resources for military. So I will give it a 7 because yeah, it costs 2 civil actions. Now we get to the old leaders and wonders after that, and we start with Napoleon. Napoleon of course used to be, yeah, I don't know if Napoleon or strategy was stronger, probably Napoleon even, so Napoleon would probably be in 11 or 12. Yeah, he was that strong. He was nerfed a little bit, 1 less military action. I think the bigger nerf is basically in the new heroes, our leaders, that are stronger. Also they made some other old leaders stronger. Problem with Napoleon always was that if one took them, the other would get another leader that was just way below Napoleon's level, or if Napoleon comes late, both players have to wait for him because nobody can take one of the other leaders, and basically one has no H2 leader and the other has Napoleon, and then those games most likely were over. So Napoleon definitely was a 10 or even an 11. With that nerf, it's hard to say still. There are games where it's, of course he's very strong, especially if you have strategy and don't need the second military action. He didn't change that much in those situations, but in a lot of situations the 1 military action is quite important. So I'll give him a 9 now, especially considering the power level of the other leaders. Now Shakespeare also buffed a little bit, now technologies for 3 science less. Yeah, I think he's a 3 or even 4 player leader. In 1 versus 1s you can't go from really ever, only if like your opponent goes for Bach and you basically both agree that it will not be a military game, then of course he can be quite strong. The problem is that of course you need an opera, a theater and a library, and having both of them is really hard. So you basically have to have like the library from H1 and then go for opera, but then the problem is you have to know that before and get the library, so it takes quite a lot for him to work. If he does, he's great, but it's hard to get him to work. So I would say he's a 6, especially in 1 versus 1 he's not not doing a lot most of the time. Also the one happy face, not that strong. Yeah, in more player games he definitely can be a good leader. So Newton used to always be my second favorite from H2 after Napoleon. If I couldn't get Napoleon, I'd try to get Isaac. Giving you science, giving you civil actions, overall just strong. So I would give him an 8. Then Maximilian, Robespierre. He was always a little bit like, yeah, he can be good, but most of the time, as I said, I have an H1 government already, and then he doesn't do that much. With Republic, he could work quite nicely. Also, you have to consider that he not only can develop H2 government forms, but also H3. Yeah, not that often that you can make him work. He's more like a Euro or leader that I think if I see that I need a new government and I see Maximilian is there, and also have an H2 government form, then he's a great pickup, but you can't plan anything around him really, so I don't do that. Maybe one could plan a little bit more about around him, and that would make him stronger, but he doesn't fit my playstyle that much because I have most of the time an H1 government form, so I will give it a 7. So James Cook, of course, again, something to do with colonies, always super dependent on the game before, not versatile at all. If he produces U2 culture, that's like if you have one colony, then he's okay, but you really have to make use of him getting more colonies, and to be honest, 2 colonization force extra isn't that strong. It doesn't guarantee that you get any colonies, especially if the others have navigation or something. So I'm not a big fan. There are certain games where I feel like, wow, he was really good. But yeah, there's always some games where every leader is very strong, and James Cook just has very few of those games. So I can't give him more than a 5. Again, more stronger in more player games, but in 1 vs 1, really dependent on how many colonies you put in the deck. So Bach also was improved a little bit, now gives you 2 culture just like that, which makes him really big culture producer. The ability always feels a little bit, always felt a little bit, yeah, I don't know, because he doesn't give you one extra selection to do that. I would have buffed him a little bit more in that direction. Yeah, you can upgrade your religions to operas or something, which is nice. In the right game, he's definitely very strong, producing like I don't know, 5, 6, 7 culture all of a sudden because of Bach. Also some science you save, and not having to destroy your religion but just upgrading them. Bach probably strongest with opera. Maybe if you have the H1 theater, can also be good, but overall not stronger than 7, I think. So we get to the Transcontinental Railroad and the other wonders. Transcontinental Railroad actually was buffed a little bit, just gives 1 strength more now. I honestly don't understand why. Maybe because the strong new wonders and Ocean Liner Service was buffed as well, but I've always felt like Transcontinental Railroad was one of the strongest wonders from H2. So yeah, it's a really good wonder. If you have iron, it's definitely fine. With coal it becomes super strong, and then you always have the option to go for oil, and the strength in 1 vs 1 super important. 4 steps to build, 12 resources, it's fine. Quite expensive, I would say, the 3 civil actions, but not like out of the ordinary for H2 wonders. Also keep in mind that you can't use your engineering genius from H2 efficiently on this, because you can only save 3 resources per step. So yeah, I would give it an 8, depending a little bit on what resource production you have and what if you have coal. Ocean liner service was buffed quite a bit, and rightly so. It was very weak. The only way you could use it before was if you get it super early, if you only had 2 or you had no irrigation, and it solved basically your food problem. And now it gives 1 yellow token and costs 2 resources less. And like this, the range that you can use it definitely increases. In the end of H2 it's still not strong, because you will take 1 or 2 turns to build it after that. If you get it in the middle of H3 and you get like 4 or 5 uses also out of it, it just isn't worth it. But if it comes quite early, if you have a little bit of a population problem, don't have any colonies with yellow tokens, it definitely can be quite strong, so I would give it a 7. The Eiffel Tower, always had a little bit, yeah, it's one of those wonders. If you can sneak it in, it's super strong. Like if you can make use out of the happy phase and not have to go for organized religion or team sports, but keeping Eiffel Tower and your religions, and then getting those 4 culture every turn can be really strong. Sometimes people take it and then they just never finish it because it's quite expensive, and if your opponent sees that you get Eiffel Tower and he can't just say, okay, you have Eiffel Tower, I don't react to that. Most of the time, if you commit to 13 resources you spend on Eiffel Tower, then your opponent will say, okay, you spend so much resources on that, I will spend it on military, and then if you have finished this, he wins the war, or you took it and he increases his military and you can't finish it. When an opponent of mine takes Eiffel Tower, I usually go for military if the game allows that, and then I can just punish him for taking Eiffel Tower and he can't finish it, or if he finishes, I win wars. So yeah, you have to be very careful with the Eiffel Tower. So I will give it a 7, could be an 8 as well, not sure. Not something you can just pick up. You have to consider if you can invest so much in basically only culture protection at that point, because it's a tipping point of going for culture or for military. So think before you take that wonder. Then the Kremlin, the sad face, sometimes is very important and makes you think, no, I can't take this. If you have team sports or organized religion, or especially the St. Peter's Basilica, this becomes really strong, especially early, as most of these, the earlier you get them, the stronger they are. Getting your civil and military action, especially if you are low, if you have only 5 civil actions, and maybe 3 or 4 military actions, this is quite important, and also the 2 culture behind that, always nice to have. So for me the Kremlin is an 8. And we get to the new leaders and wonders, starting with Catherine the Great. Once per game, as a political action, you may cause each player with a lower strength rating to lose 1 yellow token. If at least 2 tokens are lost, you gain 1 yellow token. So in 1 vs 1 it's just if you're stronger, the other player loses 1 yellow token and you gain 1. Not sure how that is in the 3-player games. I think it also is if at least 1 is lost, you gain 1. So Catherine, super strong new leader, because also the 2 culture she gives and the military action. Basically she's a little bit like Napoleon, but in a different way. She punishes the other player if he's behind in military without you having to declare wars or going for aggressions. So with Catherine you can go for a very high military and get the culture production from her behind that. So the other player has to catch up with military, or he will lose a yellow token and you will gain one. And then also, while you are doing this arms race kind of thing, Catherine produces you a lot of culture. So I really like her. We'll give her a 9. Not a 10 because she actually doesn't give you that much to get stronger, get more military, only this one military action. So you need to be in a place where you can go for a military race. Now Maria Theresa, whenever you gain or increase your population, score 1 culture and 1 science. At the start of the action phase you get 1 resource for building and upgrading military units, 3 resources if you are one of the 2 weakest players. So if you are not the weakest player, she becomes really bad. Like the culture and science, it's not much, like you will have her for maybe 4 or 5 turns maximum, and that you will increase your population maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times if you really time it very well, or if you have Oceanliner service you can get more, but then it's only a little bit of science, a little bit of culture, and for all that planning it's just not worth it. If you are weaker, you can use 3 resources every turn for your military. She's quite strong like that. But I would say overall she's one of the worst new leaders, maybe the worst, because she just doesn't give you anything all the time, and most of the time you don't increase your population that much in H2. So for me she's 4 or 5, I will give her 5. If you are behind and want to catch up, have low economy, she can be good. Like if you have good food production but low resource production, then maybe take her. So James Watt, your farms and mines and their technologies have a reduced cost of -4 and -4 in H3 and -2 and -2 in H2, and that is the technologies of that ages, not if you are in the age. When Watt leaves play, score culture equal to the production of your best farm or mine. He's definitely a more player, like 3 or 4 player leader. He can be good in 1 versus 1s, and he can be quite, so he can be super strong, mostly in more player games. In 1 vs 1 you really have to be careful because there's only 1 coal and 1 selective breeding, and if you take James Watt before you have any of those and the other player takes them, then he doesn't give you anything for the whole age basically, and maybe you can make use of him in the beginning of age 3, but there's no guarantee that oil will be in the early part of the 3rd age. So yeah, you can only, in 1 vs 1 you can basically only take him if you already have coal in your hand, or if you can take them at the same time. If you get a lot of use out of him, he can be crazy. He can increase your production also with oil. You will be at 3 oil and for very little cost, so then you have so much resource you can spend on anything. So keeping that in mind, I think in 3 or 4 player games he's probably a 9, maybe even 10, I don't know. Don't have that much experience with him in that games, but in 1 vs 1 he's not that strong because he has quite a lot of things you need to have, like coal or selective breeding, and he's not that good if you have iron already. So I'd give him an 8 overall. Now for Alfred Nobel, when you replace Nobel you do not get the civil action back. Instead, from then on, any civilization scores for culture at the end of your turn, at the end of any turn during which it developed 2 or more technologies. So I really like Alfred Nobel, mostly because of his 2 strength and 2 science production. I actually think of this ability he has makes him weaker, because when I use Alfred Nobel, I use him mostly for the science. If I have low science production and I want to bridge the H2 and I don't want to go for scientific method, or even maybe not go for computers, especially in 1 versus 1s when it's a high military game, and I just want to skip any science production really. If I have one of the wonders that produces science and maybe 3 philosophies, and then I don't want to increase my science production that much in H3, and then is losing the civil action and not getting back, and maybe even giving your opponents the ability to turn their computers or their science production into even more culture, can be a downside. It's not that big, and you can definitely plan for it. You can go for computers if you have Alfred Nobel, and then go for this high science production. But yeah, overall very strong still, but the ability is also very interesting, but it makes them, for my games, a little bit weaker, because I'm not a very high science player. So he will be an 8 for me. And we continue with Anthony Gaudi. Developing an urban building technology costs you 1 science less for each other type of urban building you have. Your best urban building of each type produces 1 extra culture. So it's really interesting with these different types. But since most of the time you don't want that many different types of civil buildings, it feels a little bit weird to me. Some players use him and basically take him as an excuse to have more different urban buildings. We always feel like, okay, it costs you several actions to take those technologies, develop them, and then build them. And if you have to do that for every type of urban building, it's quite a lot of actions, and also not that cheap. It becomes a little bit cheaper with Anthony Gaudi, and I think his turning point is maybe if you develop 1 or 2 technologies with him and have 3 different type of urban buildings, so it produces 3 culture and gave you like 5 or 6 science reduction cost. Probably better in high player games, as a lot of these are very situational, and the higher you get, the more they are very different niches. So I would give Anthony Gaudi a 7 for my personal experience. And we will continue with Charles Darwin. Each of the temples gives you 1 happy face less. Each of your labs and libraries produce 1 extra culture. Taking technology card costs you 1 civil action less, but no less than 1. So for me, he's not so good, because as I said before, I usually have quite a lot of religion, like normal temples from HA, which Charles Darwin then makes useless. If you have other means to support your science happy face production or happy faces, he can be very interesting. But always these libraries you will have to build. It's I always feel like having to have libraries for these leaders is just too much to ask, because libraries are very greedy, and then getting a leader who also builds on that and also only produces culture is then also greedy. So you have a greedy urban building and a greedy leader. Just too much greed for me, especially in 1 versus 1s, as I say so often. So for me it's a 5 or 6 again. Maybe we'll give it a 6, because if you have like 3 alchemy and your happy faces come from team sports, he will produce 3 culture and also giving you some civil actions, because you have to pay less for taking technology cards. So let's continue with the new wonders. We start with Harvard College. once per turn you may play an action card you took during that turn, and then 1 culture and 3 science. My least favorite new wonder from H2, because the 3 science production is just too late for that to be so important that you get a wonder for that, because these wonders all are very expensive, all have very limited time, so they have a very limited amount of time where they are usable, because the H2 doesn't last that long. H3 then it's also only like 5-6 turns. It's not like the H1 or HA wonders that you have the whole game. These you always have to think about the cost and how many turns you will have them. And Harvard College, not one of my favorites. Having the option to play yellow cards is really strong, but in the long run it doesn't really provide you with much. Only the ability to get these yellow cards if you really need them for that turn. But for me, Harvard College is not that good, especially if it comes late in the game, and the 3 science production just isn't enough. So the Statue of Liberty, the government produces culture equal to its level, and then 3 yellow tokens, and only 2 steps to build it. Really nice stats to build. 7 and 5 also manageable. Yeah, this is a little bit weird for me to say, because most of the time I have an H1 government form, and so it produces 1 extra, and then it's just not good enough most of the time, because you will get it quite late, and then these 3 yellow tokens aren't that important anymore. If it produces 2 culture instead with an H2 government form, then it's okay. If you plan to get an H3 government form early anyway, then it's strong, I think. Then it's good. So I would give it an 8 maybe, depending on which government form you have. Maybe in H1 it's a 7, and H2 it's an 8, and then with an H3 government form it's a 9. So I'll go to the middle and give it an 8. So the Louvre Museum. The Louvre keeps its blue token when completed. Each can be spent during your action phase to gain 2 resources. The Louvre produces an extra 1 culture per blue token on it. That's my favorite new H2 wonder, because it gives you culture production and also the ability to always have these resources in the back of your in your mind, and also in your opponent's mind all the time, because when he declares a war, he also always has to think, okay, he always has 6 resources more than he really has. So there's one problem with it, that's blue tokens. So if you always have 3 tokens lying there, then you're very limited. So this, with Justice System, becomes super strong. Having the ability to store your resources and have them produce culture, that's the best you can ask for. Also, if you consider that you can gain 6 resources from this, it's not that expensive. And in the end, when maybe the last turn, and you can use these 6 resources to build a wonder from H3, then it's also super strong. So for me it's a 9. For 10, the problem with the blue tokens is too much, but I really like this wonder. And now the last new wonder and the last card we have is a Suez Canal. When you complete this wonder, you may colonize a territory in your hand. You produce an extra 1 resource for each colony you have. And 4 steps to build, not that expensive with resources, like normal. Yeah, this also depends on which colony you have in your hand, so you can't take this without that colony in your hand, obviously. and in my opinion it has to be an H2 colony, and one of the good ones. Or if you have like 2 or 3 colonies already, it becomes super strong with the resource production. So there's different scenarios where it's really good. If you only have one medium or a little bit good colony in your hand, and you have no other colonies in play before, so you get, I don't know, vast territory, some yellow tokens and 1 resource production each turn, it's not that strong. So yeah, it really depends on what you have, but obviously it can be super strong. If you have, you can also plan, of course, if you see that this one does in the game, you can take Columbus, colonize like that, play colonies in the event stack, and try to get as many colonies as you can, and then go for the Suez Canal, and then it can be a game-winning wonder. With, if you produce 3 or 4 resources extra, it's crazy. But it's not a wonder you can just take, like the Louvre. You can basically always take the Louvre. If you of course, the blue token problem, but even with that, then you just have to play around that. The Suez Canal, very dependent on your game before that, how many colonies you have and which colony you have in your hand. So this was this says H1, this obviously H2, and these are all the cards. I hope you agree somewhat. If you don't, let me know, you can have a discussion about it, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you for the H3 very soon.